Alright, what's up everybody? Welcome. We got a live video going on. We're gonna answer any comments that you have, any questions about the content. So this is all about software engineers, how you're gonna be impacted, during this crisis, depending on a couple of different scenarios. People think software engineers are pretty safe, but at the end of the day, it's a service industry. So a lot of companies will be cutting back on new features and focus on sustain mode. So we're going to talk about a lot of different topics that are relevant to you. Tech workers as well, like designers is a big one, as well as managers and product managers and so forth. All right, so yeah, if this video is something you're interested in, hit like, and if you can, share the video, because that way we'll get more people with comments, more people watching, and hopefully get more interesting discussion and more content and info out of this. All right, so without further ado, let's jump right in. Just have some notes here to make sure I cover all the important points. Okay, so there's several different scenarios. The first one is if we do get back to work in June, July, over the summer in the next couple of months. That would be probably the ideal case. The economy has already taken a pretty big hit, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on politicians to basically get the economy going again, right, and reduce the impact. So if possible, if at all possible, I do believe that's the most likely scenario, but who knows? So the other scenario would be if things are not, back to some normalcy with people going back to work in the summertime, then we're probably going to see more of a prolonged quarantine, stay-at-home type of scenario. So in that case, it's really going to depend on when there is some kind of vaccine or some kind of new development, treatments, increased hospital care, or like a long tail of medical resources that's really going to support people, to like cycle through this. So, that could be more prolonged. It really depends on like development cycles on medical industry. So could be up to 2 years. And then hopefully we're, even in the longer scenario, we're coming out with some way to address this, and then eventually we will return to normalcy with a new resilient health system that would allow us to go back to physical offices. But either way, there's going to be far-reaching effects, especially because there's been a huge push toward remote work. And so companies have already gotten way more experience with what remote work looks like. And so that actually is going to kickstart the trend for remote work and make that like a new option even bigger than it was before. So let me dive into some other topics here. So the first one is about, so many software engineers and designers as well are overly optimistic. Like, oh, we have cushy jobs, it's high demand. Now, that is true. However, in this kind of economy, it's starting to look like a downturn, a true bear market. Things are very uncertain still. And especially if there's a long-term quarantine, many small businesses are in kind of this consumer sector, whether that's restaurants or entertainment, bars, that kind of thing. And so many of those businesses are either going to be hit hard or basically just go out of business if there's going to be any long-term quarantine effect or something like that. So that does have a downstream impact on a lot of the tech industries, right? So the most important thing you can remember is that software engineering is a service business. So when you write code, or when you're a QA or a tester, or when you're a designer or a product manager, any of those types of fields, you are performing a service for a company, right? And so they're going to be kind of like shifting around their activities they're doing, going into some kind of sustain mode. So probably that they want to sustain kind of like, a regular pace where they're supporting their existing software, but they want to conserve capital at this time while the economy may not be growing as much. In order to survive, right? Because otherwise, if you just start hiring a bunch of new people, but you don't have new customers because your customers are small businesses or are downstream from that, then of course you're going to run out of money. So that's really where all that comes from. So small businesses will be hit the worst. So especially if you're a freelancer, if your customers are small businesses, that's going to be the biggest hit. So think about how you can shift and start to service different customers who are going to be around during this time spending money. And as well, any businesses that are around, even if they're online businesses that are doing well, they're probably going to be focusing on advertising to like beat out the competition at this time. So they may or may not be focusing on like new design and development opportunities. So as for full-time employees, right, the question is really like, how vital is your job? How vital is your team with your company, right? So if you're full-time, so I would say like for all all roles, even like contract or like long-term, short-term contracts. So QAs and testers are pretty high risk because companies know that software engineers can also write tests, right? So that's something where many companies may make the decision to downsize QA and testing and just basically say, hey, software engineers are now going to write tests for their code. The other thing is designers. So design, at the end of the day, like businesses know that design is only one element of kind of like the sales and marketing and so forth. And so like if the design's okay, like designers are not like vital and core to the business necessarily in a lot of cases. And so businesses will go down to like maybe a skeleton crew of designers during this time. So designers can be at high risk right now. So as well, managers. So if you're in like a management type of role, it really depends on how vital the team is at your company in the larger sphere of things. So that's something to really keep in mind. And as far as software engineering, the first at risk is probably junior engineers. So if you are a junior engineer and you're really relying on maybe like learning for part of your role, it's possible companies might downsize on junior engineers just because they feel they can't afford to invest in training those engineers during this market. So just, keep your eye out. Of course, the best way is to just prove your value because they probably won't get rid of everybody. And just understand where your team is. So if you believe you're at risk, start looking for a job just in case. As far as senior engineers, it might be that senior engineers are to companies a little bit like too expensive. It just depends what your salary bracket is and your current role at the company. So just really keep your eye out, especially it really depends on your company. Like if your company is one that seems to be hit hard by this, so if they're served by small businesses, etc., that would be the example. Or we'll get into this later. I have another point here about what companies are going to do well during this time. So if we do see that prolonged period, you should be looking for a job there. Now, mid-level engineers probably are the safest because you're kind of in this golden range of like you produce a lot of value like compared to your relatively like mid-level salary. So from the company's perspective, that's the core team that they want to keep things going and basically keep their software running during this time, during sustain mode. So yeah, that's the main idea about that. All right. So the next point is about quarantine economy. So we've already seen this a little bit. Many companies, so it's like food delivery, it's like anything that people need at home. So physical goods and products that people want to ship to their homes, right? Or virtual entertainment. So of course, like Netflix, any like video content platforms, basically any entertainment, as well as like arts and crafts that people would want to do at home or do with their kids, because kids are at home, kids are not in school, right? So basically any of that stuff, gaming, and actually like virtual reality and augmented reality even could receive a boost from this time if people are at home and have a little bit of discretionary budget that, maybe they're not going to the bar or to restaurants and so forth, but they would buy, like a new entertainment for home. And then, the final piece is actually around education. So kids are at home, parents are buying educational content to make sure their kids are receiving a good enough education. As well, workers are trying to educate themselves to stay sharp and make sure that they're secure in their current job, or maybe are even reskilling and trying to find additional sources of income that they can actually work from home and receive this income. People might also be even trying to start like entrepreneurial businesses on the side over the internet that they can work from home and work on. So all of these industries should receive a little bit of a boost, and it would be really good if you could look into, if you're not already working in that kind of industry or you feel your job is at risk, that's the best place to start. And this is really broad, so everyone should do your own research. If you have ideas about something I didn't mention or you want to reiterate, post a comment and tell us what you think is going to be growing during this time. Okay, so in the ideal scenario, the quarantine will be short, and in that case, these kind of like at home, kind of like not necessities, but interesting, like entertainment and so forth, or arts and crafts type things might be great, like really popular. People are going to buy them a lot. I've already seen there's more advertising for that kind of thing. Now, in the longer term, though, people might be tightening up their budget. So that's something to think about in the longer term scenario is like, what are really the necessities? So coming back to that, I think remote work, if you're in tech, if you're in like that kind of field, is the biggest thing. So companies like Slack, Basecamp, Zoom, there's a ton of companies out there that somehow are involved in remote work. All those companies should theoretically be growing, and many of them are looking for tons of new employees. So while it will be competitive, that's still your best bet to go and apply for those kinds of companies if you need a job during this time. All right. So really that leads into the last point here about this is really kicking off a remote work trend. So even if there's a short quarantine, companies now realize, oh, well, it's already possible that many workers can work remote, and they've already seen people work remote, and they've invested something into like training for that or like building new workflows around that. So depending on the length of the quarantine, like this could really kick off a new industry, because why pay for expensive real estate and offices if everybody is already good at working from home, right? So in the past, you kind of had this scenario where you want to work from home because you're like, you know that it can be a viable option or it works best for you. And companies are like, no, we'd really prefer you come into the office with our team because that's where everybody is, right? That was in the past. But now that this has been kind of like adapted to, it's like a new normal. It might be the case that companies would really prefer that you have this remote work experience. And the other thing is, like, if you're not very good at working from home, you're really going to be at risk because you're not going to be performing relative to your coworkers, and that's going to put you like first on the list if the company needs to make some hard decisions, right? So it's really important that you get really good at remote working, and this could even be like a longer term trend where companies want to downsize their real estate and have remote teams. Now, the last piece about this is if companies are hiring remote workers, they're probably also going to hire them from outside the country, right? Somewhere where it's cheaper, that they can get quality remote work, and because everybody's got to be remote anyway. So companies are really thinking about that, like, where are all the remote workers? So these are all things to keep in mind. All right, so just some other points here. One thing that's going to happen is a lot of countries are already seeing pretty big changes in their currency. So like currency exchange, currency value. And so some countries, like the stuff can literally be twice as expensive overnight. It's really crazy. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're in one of these countries, you're already feeling it. When you're applying for companies, think about who their customers are and all that kind of thing. This does have like an overreaching impact. I do want to create some more videos in the future to talk more about the macro climate in terms of the economy. It's something that I'm still researching, and will post some content as soon as I have more there. But yeah, very important. So keep that in mind. All right, let's see if there's anything else here that is in my notes here. Okay, so again, like delivery companies, so things like that. Let's see. All right, well, I think that basically wraps it up for now. We'll be having more stuff later, so stay tuned and keep watching out for that kind of stuff. All right, thanks. So again, like, share this video. Let's get everybody involved in the conversation, and let's talk about it. Like, what is your big idea for this time? What's the right way for tech workers, especially, to get prepared for this? If you're a freelancer, if you're working with small businesses and now you need to shift, how can we all basically like bridge this transition? Do we need to learn new skills? What is it all about? All right, thanks for watching.